Let's talk about organizational justice, how things are perceived to be fair in organizations. So we're going to define organizational justice as the perception of fairness in organizations. Now, this is important that you note that we're talking about perception of fairness, not actual fairness. It's what a person feels and perceives and sees, regardless of whether it's actually fair or not. Now, whether it's actually fair or not is incredibly important, but that's a little bit different than organizational justice, where we're going to be talking about the perceptions of fairness. Now, the causes and effects of this perception are really important. They're both important for the employee because it's going to have an effect on his or her life, but it's also important for the organization because there's a lot of organizational level outcomes that are also involved. So what are some of the consequences of perceived injustice? Well, for the employee, there's lower job satisfaction, and from the organization's point of view, there's less employee retention. The employee's more likely to quit. There's greater absenteeism and theft. People tend to think when things are unjust, they're going to balance things out by stealing more. The work quality goes down. If they think the organization's unfair, they don't feel motivated to work their best. The employee's health tends to go down. It can begin with insomnia, but go to other stress-related ailments also. And there's fewer organizational citizenship behaviors. Employees are less willing to help each other out, doing things that aren't necessarily on their job description. Now let's look at different types of justice that all humans want, and if any of these four go wrong, there's going to be a lack of organizational justice. The first is distributive justice, and that is how fair is what I receive for my work. And this typically includes salaries or promotions. Is salary given out fairly, and are promotions given out fairly? If so, there's distributive justice. Now, in general, people prefer what's known as equity, and that means rewards in proportion to contributions. People that are more skilled and work more hours and work harder and are more effective should get paid more than people who are less skilled or have less put in less effort or less motivated or produce lower quality results. So that's the concept of equity, that the rewards are in proportion to the contributions. But sometimes people prefer equality, that everybody should get paid equal, or that people should equally get promotions. Or another way of looking at compensation, some people would say, oh, needs-based is the most fair. The people that need the most money should get paid the most. So these are different ways, and perhaps in different situations, they're quite appropriate. But generally, in organizational contexts, people prefer equity, where rewards are in proportion to contributions. A second type of organizational justice is procedural justice, and that is how fair is a process that leaders use to make decisions, especially relating to the distribution of promotions and salaries. So low procedural justice can occur when there's favoritism, when it's not the hardest working who get and the best performing who get the promotions or the salary increases, but it's because of favoritism. Unwillingness to listen to other people's points of views leads to procedural justice. And this can be just in everyday working situations, regardless of changes in promotions or salaries. If somebody's trying to do something and the supervisor won't listen to them, that just seems really unfair. And similarly, if there's an unwillingness to consider all the information available, if the employee has something important to say to the boss, but the boss doesn't want to hear it, that is also an example of a procedural injustice. People consider it unfair. A third type of organizational justice is interpersonal justice or interactional justice. This interpersonal or interactional justice measures to what degree do leaders treat people with dignity, respect, and emotional support. It's kind of like, to what degree do they treat them as human beings that are valuable, where they focus on showing respect and having a healthy relationship. So this interpersonal or this interactive justice reduces the effect of distributive injustice. For example, if there's pay cuts, generally that is a disaster in an organization. Even if everybody has to get a pay cut, people are just not happy about it and they think it's unfair. But if you've got a good relationship with your supervisor and he really shows you respect, there's a good chance that you're not going to take it out on him or the organization because of this interpersonal or interactional justice. And the nice thing about this interpersonal interactional justice is that it's not a limited resource. It's not like money where there's only so much of it that an organization can distribute. In any situation, treating people with respect is never impossible due to limited resources. We can treat everybody with respect. So we can always provide interpersonal or interactional justice. No matter how badly things are going with the rest of the organization, we can always demonstrate it to the people that we're in contact with. A fourth type of organizational justice is informational justice. And that is the information used for decision making being shared fairly? Sometimes this is considered an aspect of interactional justice because it's the way that people interact. Is my boss telling me everything that's going on behind the scenes to make these decisions? Is it clear why people are being laid off or why the salaries are being reduced? And because even if the situation isn't too bad, if an employee feels that they're not getting all the information, they're going to think the worst and think that people have really bad motives for what's going on, or the situation's worse than it actually is. But if they have all the information that's being used to determine how the organization should react to a problem, they're more likely to go along with the decision. But the information that the organization provides the employee must meet certain criteria. First of all, it has to be perceived as true. So if the organization or the manager has a history of being deceptive, it's probably not going to be perceived as true. Moreover, it has to be logically consistent. If a manager or an organization gives a bunch of reasons that just don't hold together, people are going to say, shine it, that I don't believe it. It also has to provide sufficient justification for the decision. If people are being laid off, if the reasons seem really superficial and not sufficient, the information is going to be considered a very low value, and people are going to feel an injustice. The information has to be timely. It has to be provided at the time the decision is made so that people, as they're forming their reactions, know how to piece it all together. And it has to be really clear and specific, not vague generalities, but very, very clear so that everybody can understand it with enough details so that people can see how the decisions were made and how those decisions were the best decisions or the most just decisions possible given the circumstances. Now, sometimes things don't go well with organizational justice. Sometimes organizations can be doing things really fairly, but still injustices are going to be perceived. And part of this is due to some of our cognitive biases, which impact our perceptions of justice. When you're familiar with fast thinking and slow thinking. Fast thinking are these emotional and heuristic type shortcuts that we make to make conclusions really quickly, whereas slow thinking is this cognitively going through the details and thinking things through rationally. And but our fast thinking, the easy thinking, the faulty thinking, sometimes prevents us from making rational conclusions. For example, we have self-serving biases. If we're given ambiguous information that's not very clear, we're going to interpret it in ways that benefit ourselves. We're going to make ourselves look like the good guys and other people look like the bad guys. We similarly, there's a fundamental attribution error. That's the when we see something going wrong in somebody else's life, whether it's them, they get a pay cut, they're late for a meeting, things like that, we're going to blame it on their personality or character. Whereas if it happens to us, if we get a pay cut, we're going to blame it on the circumstances or other people. We're not going to blame it on ourselves generous. That's the fundamental attribution error. We tend to see ourselves as innocent and as good, and other people as incompetent or immoral. So some of the results of cognitive biases are that when we can see injustices committed by others much more easily than we can see the injustice that we've committed. And the same thing with groups. We can see the injustices committed by other groups of people more easily than we can see the injustices that people of our own group have committed. And another result is that we can interpret ambiguous information in such a way that we feel like a victim of injustice, even though we had a role in playing whatever whatever led to the decision being made. We will tend to feel like a victim and want to blame others rather than take responsibility for our own actions. So these perceptions of injustice can have a huge impact on our lives, and if we can overcome some of our cognitive biases and avoid the fast thinking and do some of the slow rational thinking, we might be able to see it from a different perspective and have a more balanced approach to how we react to different situations.